Hi, I'm Michelle from Bloomella, and today for Bloom in 5, I am painting 5 watercolour mushrooms. So if you would like to see how I do this, then let's get started.
So we're getting started with our 5 mushrooms for Bloom in 5, and as you can see I'm laying down a lighter ochre shade and a slightly browny plum colour to the edge, and then I'm just going to paint within that area, just going to stroke the brush up and pull some of the colour down. And I'm just adding a bit of water and a bit more colour to my brush. We're not trying to add too much colour or too much water at the moment, we're just trying to get the base down and then add some darker colours on top. I'm using my Artify brush in size 8. This is one of my favourite brushes at the moment. You'll see me using it all the time. It's just a really good size for this type of creative project. So I'm also grabbing some purple. It's like quite a really nice deep cranberry colour, and I'm just going to pull that down and add a bit more red to the brush as well, so we've got that variation. I love having quite a few different colours so it doesn't appear too flat, which is a good trick on just trying to get things a bit more interesting, add a bit more texture. If you're just using one flat colour, even a variation of that same colour, it still can appear a little bit flat. So adding in a few different colours can really make that texture come out and make it feel a lot more alive. Just going to add, using the tip of my brush, just a few little lines as well around the mushroom. And then I'm going to do underneath the cap of the mushroom and just sort of bring in some of the ochre colours and a bit more tan, and just going to do a few lines and leave a bit of white as well, which always adds a bit more interest rather than trying to make it too block colour. And then as you can see, I was just lifting up some of the colour there as well. So if you think a bit of an area that you've painted is a bit too intense, you can sort of dab the paint off your brush and then just stroke that onto the area and lift it up, and then you can add an alternative colour if you want to see how that looks. Just try not to overwork one area because obviously that will affect the paper underneath, but yeah, if you need to just lift off some colour, and then you can add some darker colours as well to one side if you want to create a bit of shadow or a bit of sort of a dark reflective area, you can add that as well. Moving over to mushroom number 2, I'm just using a light grey base just to paint the ring of the mushroom that goes underneath the cap and the gills, and then just adding in some darker sort of a grey brown colour just to outline some of the sides for shadow, and then just gently adding a bit more water just to bleed that out to create like a nice shadow. And then obviously you would have like a little shadow under the cap as well. So just adding that detail in, and a little bit of like a dark charcoal grey as well for some more shadow, and adding some more lines. And then I'm just using sort of a crimson red, and I've gently, very gently, I'm not sure if you can see, sketched out the design of the mushroom. And I'm just sort of painting around some of the white spots that typically these field mushrooms tend to have. And I'm going to use a variation of different reds again to create some interest. And I'm just sort of going round the areas where the white spots are, and then just sort of painting around them gently rather than painting around the whole of the mushroom cap first and then trying to go inward. I'm just sort of working section at a time. Just being careful not to touch the top of the white stalk ring area because the red would bleed into the top, which is great if that's the effect you're going for. And that's the great thing with watercolour, we don't need to necessarily stick to certain rules. You can try out lots of different things, and hopefully Bloom in 5, the 5 different elements that we will paint each week, will give you a great idea of different things that you can paint as well, like prompts and different ideas of what you want to try out, maybe in your sketchbook or a pad like I'm using. So back to the mushroom, you can see I'm using in some darker reds at the bottom and just sort of outlining that at the bottom edge, which is bleeding up nicely. And then I'm using some more orangey tones as well. So when you're using red, and I find that I don't want it to look too flat, adding in some darker red, adding in some oranges and peaches really adds a nice variation you know, to the cap of the mushroom or whatever subject you're painting. And we're just going to leave some, to make it seem more realistic, we're going to add in some larger circle spots, we're going to add in some smaller circle spots and irregular shapes, so again it appeals more natural and like the image that I've looked at. So I'm just going to keep painting around those, adding different colours. As you can see, we've got a lighter area at the top, which would be good to highlight if it's a sunny day. There might be a spot of highlight of sun coming on that side of the mushroom, so that makes it seem more realistic again that that side of the mushroom is lighter. Then you can add some darker crimson to the bottom of the spot areas, and then this is going to add a little bit of shadow to those protruding spots on the mushroom, and a little bit of dark at the bottom as well, just to define that darker area underneath, which would be shaded and shadowed. Then I'm just going to add even more darker pigment and under some of the spots as well, just to make them appear a little bit more shadowed. And again, not under every single spot, then it makes it seem more realistic. And then I'm adding that grey charcoal colour and a little bit of the brown as well, those two colours together to create the underside of the mushroom where the gills would be, and then just adding some more of that detail down and texture, and just doing sort of dots and lines and some darker shadow again, just building up those layers, going from light to dark. Moving on to mushroom number 3, I've got some quite concentrated sort of like an ochre golden colour on the brush there, and then I'm rinsing some of that colour off to just drag that round the base of the cap of the mushroom. I've added in a little bit of like a cranberry purple colour, and then I'm just mixing that together on the paper with a tan, and I'm just moving that around. You don't have to use these exact colours, you could use all different psychedelic colours, bright colours or realistic colours as you want to. This is great for experimentation and see how you feel about the mixes. And I've got quite a light wash at the bottom to do the bulbous area of the stalk. So I've just laid down a very light colour, and then I'm adding in some wet on wet sort of deep purples and browns, and just stroking those down around the outside. I love that when you've got like the wet area and then you're stroking down and the brush kind of catches the dry areas of the paper but also the wet areas, and you get like a really nice defined outline but also some bleeding inside as well, which creates like a nice sort of 3D shadow around the mushroom, as you can see. And then I'm just adding various little details to the top now while it's still wet, which is creating some nice texture on the mushroom and sort of like dints and dents on the surface of the mushroom. And there's some nice purple colours, some nice orange colours, and as you can see, it adds a lot more interest. I think, you know, the first mushroom and the third mushroom is a lot more interesting to me than the second one, even though I really like the spots on that one. I really like the colour blends on the first one and the third one. Sorry, I don't know all the technical names for the mushrooms. I did have a quick look, but I was confused with which ones I'd done. I just looked at some generic mushrooms to get an idea, and you know, pick the ones that I like that were quite interesting and varied. But as you can see, there will just be mushroom 1, 2 and 3, but mushroom number 3 is coming along nicely, and just adding some more continued strokes up and down to add those sort of like rivets and textures and dents in the mushrooms, and then adding some darker shades underneath. And I think the definition and the detail between the light and the dark really creates that 3D look rather than something looking very, very flat. So if you're having trouble with your paintings looking very 2D and very flat, then try and add a lot more colour. You know, not too crazy with the colours. You can see with the third mushroom, we've stuck to a warm colour palette. We've got the ochres and some nice browns and orange colours, and yeah, that makes it a lot more textured looking. We're moving on to the fourth mushroom now, and as you can see, using this really vibrant Satsuma orange, which I love, and just stroked that all the way around the cap and added some little brown details which have bled up nicely. And this mushroom was really interesting to me because the gills were a lot more visible underneath the mushroom cap, so it's quite nice to show how you can paint like very different styles of the mushroom as well. And we're just adding in some greys and bringing some of that orange down as well, which is like a reflective colour from the cap and the stalk, which is reflecting up and bleeding up in the photo, and as you can see on the watercolour as well. Just adding some greys to the sides, just little stroke lines, and then adding some darker colours as well. This is not super realistic because we're just trying to create lines to represent the gills rather than painting them all hyper realistic. But it definitely shows the defined areas underneath the mushroom. And then using that really nice bright Satsuma orange with lots of pigment on the brush, we're just stroking that right down and adding some shadow to the side of the mushroom. I really felt like the colour was quite dark, so I couldn't get a lot of the texture in, so I actually lifted some of that colour off to add some more texture to the stalk. But this is a great representation of how you can see both sides of how you want. If you wanted to leave that strong pigment to dry, you could have left that as it is, like I did with the first mushroom, and this second one I actually pulled back some of the colour and then went in and speckled that up to add a bit more detail and texture to the mushroom stalk. And as you can see, I'm just lifting the areas where I want it to be a bit lighter, going in and it's more brown to bleed at the top, and just stroking that round and adding a bit more texture to the cap, and adding some more greys and just to add those darker shadows and define under the cap a little bit more with those gills, bringing the colours together, which is really interesting. So I liked the different style of mushrooms that I picked, so I could see a variation of the different styles and how they were coming together. Added a lot more texture to the stalk and just brought those colours down. Moving on to mushroom number 5, almost said 4, mushroom number 5. As you can see, I've done like an ivory base to the mushroom cap and just added a little bit of brown around the outside of the mushroom cap, and then brought that brown down into the stalk, and that's bled nicely over, and then added some really nice like purple colours to the side of the stalk, and then let that bleed into the brown, and then I've added quite a nice brown, so that's a nice way without using black of adding like a purpley brown. Creates a really nice dark colour, and then added some to the other side as well. Makes it look really 3D opposed to like quite a flat colour. As you can see, the first mushroom, I like the variation from the purple to the like red berry colour, but it's quite flat almost because it's quite a small stalk. We haven't got a lot of space to do to make that seem really rounded, whereas on this 5th mushroom we've got a nice thick stalk, so we can create like a nice rounded texture with the dark colour on one side and the lighter colour on the other side. This one's got really nice defined gills underneath as well, like the 3rd mushroom. Sorry, I don't know all the mushroom names. So I'm just adding in some of the spots, like on the 2nd mushroom, where this one, instead of using the negative space where the white would create the spots, we're actually adding the spots additionally to the mushroom cap. So I'm just using initially a lighter brown colour, and then I'm going over with more of a walnut shade to just go round the mushrooms and to create like a variation. We don't want to do the exact same brush strokes on each spot, which will make the mushroom appear a lot more realistic, because in nature things are so varied. Not every spot will appear identical in the mushroom, so we're trying to portray that in our watercolour. Just using some darker, almost like a black brown, a purpley brown, to just stroke in some of those gills. And we don't need to define every single gill perfectly. This is just a representation that there are gills, and we can bring various different browns in as well and add that variation and just create a bit more detail in the dots. The reason I flip from one area to another area is I'm allowing sections to dry and to become damp, so I can add a little bit more texture in areas where I want it to be drier or more damp. And then if I feel like an area needs a little bit more shadowing, I can add some more water to that area, and then I can add in a little bit colour to let that bleed if that area is dried, or if some areas I'm waiting for them to dry, so I can add more defined strokes to create a bit of a deeper shadow without it bleeding. And again, with the gills, we can just add a little bit of dark shadow to some of them, because obviously in real mushrooms some areas will be darker than others, some will be more shadowed than others, so we don't need to do the exact same colour on each individual gill underneath. And just finishing that off with a few more strokes and a few of the darker areas. So I really liked this mushroom, how it had the different spots on the top and the gills and the nice chunky stalk, so we could create that 3D effect as well. So this one was really interesting to me, and just creating some more of those dark shadows underneath the spots, and that finishes that mushroom off really. So I really hope you enjoyed painting these mushrooms with me. If you gave it a go, I'd love it if you shared them on social media so I can see them, and tag me on Instagram at Blumella. And we also have lots of free tutorials on Patreon and on our website as well, bluemela.art. So I hope you join me for some more interesting painting tutorials with Bloom in 5, which I'll be sharing every week. Different subject matters. So yeah, it's interesting to paint different things and learn new techniques. So here are the finished mushrooms, dried. I really hope you enjoyed painting them with me if you painted along, or if you plan to give them a go. Don't forget to save or bookmark this video, and looking forward to seeing you in the next tutorial and video on YouTube. Thank you so much for joining me.